Hello and welcome to our next session at Reuters Next. My name is Nick, working out of the London office here at Reuters, and I have the pleasure of discussing one of the hottest issues in the world right now, supply chain, with the CEO of Flock Freight, Oren Zaslansky. Thanks so much for joining us today, Oren.
Thanks so much for having me today.
Perfect. So to kick things off, Oren, can you give us a quick introduction on yourself and Flock Freight, please?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Oren. I'm the CEO and founder of Flock Freight. Flock Freight's mission is to fundamentally change the way freight moves, initially in the United States through the application of technology. If you would imagine shipping 4 or 5 pallets of goods between 2 major city pair, think 8 trucks, 8 drivers, 8 terminals. That's the traditional way of moving freight in this country. What Flock Freight is doing is using software and technology so that the outcome is 1 truck, 1 driver, no terminals. We move our freight in a completely what we call hubless manner.
Perfect. So we are seeing a lot of bottlenecks and delays across supply chains globally. The supply chain has almost become a pop culture term. A lot of my friends have actually been sending me memes of various supply chain issues throughout 2020 and 2021. In very simple terms, for folks listening to this, can you explain the current state of supply chain for us?
Yeah, I can relate to being a recipient of those memes and emails as if I should fully understand and have all the answers to it. I'd say it's really all about volatility. We're currently living at the intersection of driver shortage meets imbalance of supply and demand. So simply stated, obviously the West Coast ports of the United States, specifically Long Beach, have been a particular point of focus, understandably so. The idea of having 80 large freighters out in the ocean waiting to get unloaded. Yet there are so many folks that need those goods on shore. Why can't we get them? What's the problem? Aren't people willing to work harder? I can assure you that's not the problem. The problem is that you end up with maybe 10 loads and 1 driver. There's been a significant what we call bullwhipping, where you could imagine this massive pendulum swinging from side to side, whereby you have all the trucks on one side of the country and all the freight on the other, and vice versa. And we simply can't find any equilibrium. And as we begin to do so, there's either another flare up of the pandemic and a port closure, which just sends us kind of back into tumult, and or we move into holiday periods with peak volumes due to the e-commerce providers of the world, just further exacerbating and stretching resources.
Perfect. So just asking you to get your crystal ball out, and maybe it's quite a difficult question, but I'll ask it anyway. How long do you expect the current challenges that you just mentioned to persist?
Yeah, crystal ball's right. Our belief internally at Flock is that probably by the latter part of Q1 and Q2, we should see things start to smooth out a little bit. But there's a lot of exceptions, a lot of caveats to that. One is, that the pandemic hopefully continues to head in the right direction, not the wrong. There isn't a resurgence of COVID and therefore more closures, particularly at the ports. That we've got a lot of inflation going on, and that how is that going to impact buying behavior? Now, this is a very, very macro issue that involves everything from interest rates and inflation to the pandemic in and of itself. Making some assumptions that while things will not become instantly perfect in the next 3 to 6 months, I do expect that once we get through the holiday bottleneck and we get into Q1 of next year, we should see some smoothing begin to occur. And I hate to use the concept of a return to normalcy. I'm not so sure that it will go back to exactly the way that it was, but that idea of 10 loads in 1 truck, that kind of extreme bottlenecking should begin to be alleviated first part of next year.
So as we mentioned before, obviously supply chain has become a pop culture term, and some of these challenges may seem new to a lot of folks out there, but given your experience, do you see these challenges as new experiences that the world is facing when it comes to supply chain right now?
It really isn't. I think that what's new is that we're at the extremes of it. But this idea of a hyper dynamic, just in time, fully optimized supply chain have been around for some time, particularly in the United States, as there's been a big push to offshore manufacturing. The supply chain has done a marvelous job of creating an environment whereby goods can be made thousands upon thousands of miles away. They can be shipped across many different what we call modes, boats, trucks, trains, and ultimately make their way into the hands of consumers in such an efficient manner that, quite frankly, if there's a hiccup or two, a pandemic or two, then what you end up seeing is this level of instability and volatility. Again, we saw it here in the United States, particularly heightened in second quarter of last year in 2020, where there wasn't food on the shelves, the big toilet paper rush, so to speak, and people wondered, how is that possible? I think what people miss is that the supply chain has actually been so efficient for a number of years that if we bottleneck for even a couple of days, there's no inventory on hand, locally. This is definitely one of the big challenges with the offshore manufacturing and then bringing things onshore. This could look quite different if things were made, shipped and consumed within a much more local environment, but there are obviously ripples economically to that notion as well.
Perfect. So given what you just mentioned there, what is wrong with the current way we're doing and executing supply chain?
I don't know that I'd characterize it as wrong. I think what I'd say is, pros and cons. The pros of doing it this way, I think from a very, very macro level, are there is job creation and wealth creation happening abroad, which I think is a good thing. We're creating a lot of economic opportunity globally. And an efficient supply chain has been built over the last several decades in order to accommodate those goods, moving 5, 7, 8,000 miles between the point of manufacturing and the point of consumption. The downside to that is, there's a lot of touch points. There's a lot of inefficiencies that occur in order to get those goods there much more quickly. A big, for instance, would be at the West Coast ports of the United States. If there's 10 loads waiting for one truck, that's a huge problem. But what makes it even worse is that when that one truck gets loaded, often it's not even loaded full. There's a certain order quantity that needs to go. It's going to be sent to a point of consumption. It's already delayed by weeks and weeks. We need our goods. So it's going to go ahead and it's going to get shipped 60, 70, 80% full. That creates a real opportunity both to potentially reduce that 10-to-1 ratio of loads to trucks. Maybe it can be reduced down to 7 loads or 6 loads against every one truck. While that doesn't solve the problem in totality, it takes us a long way to moving in the right direction. And additionally, from a sustainability standpoint, you can imagine the same amount of diesel fuel, the same amount of greenhouse gases are created for every mile that truck drives, basically, whether or not it's 60% full or 100% full. We get those trucks full, we reduce the supply and demand imbalance, and we increase the sustainability aspects of the supply chain.
So based on what you mentioned, we're seeing a lot of funding into the supply chain space to companies like Flock Freight. What opportunities are investors seeing in this space right now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of frontiers. There are people working on workflow automation, kind of the 2.0 version of the supply chain, more automation, more process automation, which is fantastic. There's also a whole nother bet being made on connectivity and visibility. If we could see things, would that positively impact these outcomes? The answer is absolutely. I think we have to temper that with, you see it, you get the bad news, you make a set of choices around that, but that doesn't just magically allow goods to flow more quickly. And then there's folks like us at Flock Freight that are using technology to fundamentally change the way freight moves. No truck should ever move with any empty available space on board, yet goods should flow just as quickly. So one of the things that we're working on is deconstraining or decapacitating the supply chain. And what that really means is everything right now has a size limit to it. The truck is so big, the container is so big, the ship is so big, and it sails at a certain time. The truck departs at a certain time. It can only move so quickly. Everything is ultimately capacitated in that way. What we're working on is fundamentally at a very core level, using technology to change the rules, to basically go to manufacturers anywhere and simply saying, whatever you've produced, go ahead and release it into the supply chain. It will flow through to its intended destination just as quickly, if not much faster, and then again, a much more sustainable way. Let's make sure that those trucks are full all the time, which will make greater use of the available supply that we have now.
Perfect. So this industry, the technological penetration has been quite low historically. Given what you just mentioned there, can you just delve a little bit deeper into how technology can aid supply and demand volatility and drive efficiency and overcome some of the challenges that we have mentioned today?
Yeah, I think people, sometimes it's hard to bend your mind around how big the global supply chain is, roughly $7 trillion. I think the easiest way to think about it is everything is made in one place and consumed in another. Largely speaking, there's farm to table and there's, growing something in your backyard that you put on your own plate. That's obviously, basis points of what's going on in the world. It's simply not moving the needle. So that being said, things are made in one place, consumed in another. Everything has to be moved. It's an enormous industry, and maybe of greater importance is it's enormously fragmented. So to the degree that you have tremendous fragmentation on both sides of supply and demand, whether it's the producer and the consumer, I think technology is really being brought to bear, and you're right, in a way that previously it hasn't, in order to create greater visibility, greater connectivity, and greater optimization. We know this in tech, that through great data comes insights and signal. You really can't employ a lot of cutting edge machine learning and data science until you have enough data to make any sense of the noise in there and find that signal. So simply speaking, there's a ton of data out there, but it's fragmented. It's all over the place. And there are no central places you can go to grab into it. It's not as simple as saying, okay, well, I'll just plug into A, I'll get the data I need, and now I'll be very efficient, provide visibility and optimization. So there's a lot of us working on building marketplaces to bring fragmentation together, the likes of which has never been seen before. But more than just connecting supply and demand, if you think of the kind of iconic example of a marketplace, I always think of eBay. There's somebody in one part of the world that wants to sell a spoon. There's somebody in another part of the world that wants to buy a spoon. Thankfully, eBay exists in order to facilitate that transaction. The supply chain is much, much more complex. B2B relationships are always more complex. But particularly the supply chain has so many touch points when you think of a manufactured good in Asia making its way to a consumer in the United States. So many touch points. Can we do more than just connect supply and demand, but can we truly optimize? Can we change the rules of the game? I think that's what we're so proud of and so inspired by what we do at Flock, is by putting things with things, making sure that there's a ride share environment for freight, making sure that a truck is always full. That's not only better for the trucking company so that they can make more money, but of course it's also better for the manufacturer, for the shipper, so that they only pay for the amount of transportation that they use from the very origin all the way through to destination.
So as the pandemic hopefully comes to an end and the world returns to that business cliche of new normal, what steps are needed to ensure that supply chains evolve rather than falling back on decades of inefficiency?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think the pandemic has, for a lot of investors out there, of which you can imagine, I spent a lot of my time working with investors and raising money, is the idea of the pandemic in many cases has given technology providers an opportunity to make a first impression. And ultimately, they have to execute and deliver on that. There are also other providers where it's kind of building false idols. They are benefiting from, in the big scheme of things, short-term tailwinds of a pandemic whereby things go back to or enter into some new normal. I think, divining between those two and really understanding, is this new and next, or is this just old and something that we needed to get through a tough time? Ultimately, I think it's all about execution and performance. For those people, and we're certainly one of them, that were given an opportunity to make a first impression, we have to execute. We have to continue to perform. We can't just be there in the toughest possible times whereby you lacked options and alternatives, so you gave us a chance. We have proven at this point that even in better times, less volatile times, that this is going to be a sticky experience through execution. It can't just be a claim or a brand or a lot of venture capital, quite frankly. What it needs to be is a new normal, a new version of business whereby customers realize that really the pandemic was an accelerant of this technology. It helped to maturate a technology. It brought firms together faster. I mean, that's what I told our team back in Q2 of last year when everything shut down, and it was scary, quite frankly. None of us knew what the future, let alone the present, held for us. And I told the team, it's unfair of me to ask, but we live in a supply chain. We are bringing calm to our communities through the delivery of essential goods. Run out of toilet paper, you think it's weird? Let's run out of food. Let's see what weird really looks like. Let's see what scary really looks like. And so, I asked my team to become their future selves today. If we were going to get there in a year or two, can we get there in a month or two? Not for glory, but for purpose, because this is what the world needs of us. I think a lot of folks in the supply chain had that opportunity and did not waste a good crisis. I think what's going to happen is, again, coming into the latter part of the first half of next year, Q2, certainly into the back half of 2022, is the consumers, the customers ultimately hold the power. And I think that's fantastic. And they're going to decide what they really need. And we can use Amazon as a great example. All of us were probably doing business with Amazon or Alibaba, depending upon the audience, prior to the pandemic. Most of us accelerated our engagement with those platforms. I'm pretty sure my household, while it may slow down a little and is looking forward to going out and buying, are still going to be customers of those platforms at a greater degree than we were prior to the pandemic, because quite frankly, they did a very good job. Those businesses were ready to make the most of a crisis.
You mentioned that word purpose, and it'd be remiss not to speak about COP26. Do you think it matched the optimism in the lead up? And what were the big takeaways for the logistics industry?
I think, whether or not it matched, probably not. But I don't know, from somebody who has inappropriately high expectations of myself and everyone around me. I think it's fair to say, though, I think it's all about moving forward as a community, as a world. And I think that there will be and has been forward progress. I think shining a spotlight, I'm a big believer in the idea of what gets measured gets done. So to the degree that we're talking about these things, to the degree that we're shining a spotlight on these things, people are making commitments. Are all of them going to follow through to the 100th percentile? No. But are many of them going to do more than they otherwise would have done if not for that venue and that opportunity? I think that's the case. I think that we will see many of these programs begin to move forward, make a big difference. And I think importantly, putting sustainability on everyone's minds is an opportunity to think about how everyone can be a small or large part of this. I think for most, it's too much pressure to say that you need to found a company that is going to fundamentally change the way freight moves in a much more sustainable way. I get it. That's not the right path for everyone. But what you can do, working in whatever firm you work for, is make a decision to partner with sustainability firms and agencies external of your firm. You can choose to partner with companies that are deeply purposeful, passionate, and connected to sustainability initiatives. For others, especially us at Flock, we work internally on those things. Our very business model, our very strategy, our very technology is meant to improve sustainability, to reduce greenhouse gas by 40% in the United States. I think that the sweet spot lies in just simply saying, I'm going to make a choice today to do something. If I can't do it within my own firm, if I'm not empowered to do so, if our strategy is not around that directly, then certainly indirectly I can partner with those other firms where that's a part of what they do, and in doing so, again, help do your part to save the world. I mean, those are the stakes we're playing for.
Digging into sustainability, a lot of companies and a lot of brands are tempted to just bolt on sustainability to what they do. Just from your perspective, why is it so important to place sustainability at the heart of a company's strategy, whether that's logistics strategy or broader business strategy?
Yeah, I think it comes down to two things. Maybe most important to me, I'd say your own team. Your team knows when it's not true. You can bluster all you want. As the CEO of a firm, I can tell everybody, hey, we're trying to save the world. We're doing our part. But if every decision I make, if every choice I make is purely revenue or profitability, I am being insincere. The team will know that. They will churn. We all, particularly right now in the labor tightness that we have in all markets, we work so hard to recruit top talent, churning that talent because you baited them in with a sustainability pitch, but it's insincere and inauthentic. You're going to lose that top talent. Today's talent understands they can have it all, that they can work very hard, they can make a lot of money, and they can work towards purpose. They can do something bigger than themselves. So I think that from a talent perspective, you have to be aligned. It can't be rhetoric. That has to be sincerely who and what you are. And then the second reason why I think it's so important is we all have to work together to solve this challenge, to solve this problem. There is no one firm, no matter how big they are, no matter how influential they are. There is no nation. There is no single entity in any way, shape, or form that is going to solve the sustainability problem and of climate change. It's something that we all must work together on. It's that idea, if everybody gave $1, that'd be what, $7 or $8 billion, right? It would be a lot. It's if we all made one choice a day to recycle, one choice a day to partner with a firm that is committed to sustainability, it's absolutely critical. And quite frankly, one of my co-founders likes to say, you have less time than you think. We raise a big round and we map out 2 or 3 years toward our set of milestones and next steps, and we think we have lots of time. And he's constantly constantly. Great at reminding me, you have less time than you think. This thing has to work as soon as possible. So I think climate change and sustainability absolutely falls. There is a tipping point whereby it just gets a lot harder, like exponentially a lot harder to change course. So it's something that we all must be working on. And again, you can have it all. This doesn't need to be an or. We talk about this internally, that at our stage we're an and firm, we're not an or firm, meaning we're not going to trade one core metric or another and have to make that tough choice. Instead, we're gonna pursue both. We can build a very valuable asset, create great shareholder returns and value, and at the same time do our part to reduce greenhouse gas and do our part to transform the industry. Everybody needs to put their mind on that. We just have to.
For the companies that are starting out their journey towards sustainability and carbon neutrality specifically, what advice would you give to those companies?
I think it's a balance between thinking big and starting small. I think that you want to have a big idea. It galvanizes the team. It creates that larger sense of purpose. It allows you to start chanting something. This is where we're going. This is where we're going. I think fundamentally human beings want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. I think we have for the millennia. I think it's what inspires us to get up and do the things that we do of significance. And at the same time, the expression, how do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. So, you have to take a small first step, whatever that first choice is. As long as it's a step in the right direction. Personally, my life experience is such that in the best way, you can become greedy for these things, meaning you do one little right thing and it feels good. And you want to do another right thing. Maybe you share that with your friends. Community is a whole different function these days. It isn't just your buddy that you make a phone call to or you sit next to. It's a global community and friendship now, particularly through social media. It's an opportunity to share the small little step you took, to challenge other people out there to make one little step. It's, again, if everybody gave $1, it's a lot of money. It's very impactful. If everybody, made one small step towards sustainability, my prediction is two things. One is that someone else will do it, that you can inspire others. There's no larger network effect than the global population. And secondly, if you make one small step, you'll make a second. I think the hardest step, the hardest, in that long journey is always that first one. And I think people are often too ambitious in mapping out what that first step should be. They want to save the world in that first step. I would argue, have that vision, have that aspiration. We all need to, because it's a big, big problem. But at the same time, one little step. I'm just going to do one little tiny right thing today, and I'll figure out what second tiny right thing to do tomorrow.
Applying what you just mentioned to the logistics industry specifically, what can companies do there to drive down their carbon emissions?
At the risk of being a little bit provocative, I think people need to be honest about what that solution looks like. There are a lot of there's a lot of rhetoric in this industry. I admit it, Flock Freight, whose very core strategy and technology is around sustainability. I won't mention the brand, but we were carrying a brand of sustainability, on the website, saying, hey, look, we use this brand, we're cutting edge, this should be important, only to find out that, I would argue the dirtiest of CO2 producers in our industry, the ones that really have done nothing to assist in sustainability, could also carry that brand. And then you realize that brand is something you just pay for. It's not something that is earned. It's certainly not something that you have to quantify. That set us out on a journey to become today the only certified B Corp in the freight industry. That is not a simple brand that you pay for. That is a very, very difficult platform and cooperative community whereby you have to prove with data that you're doing your part on the sustainability and on the diversity front. I don't want to leave that off. So, really, really challenging. And it came from us being honest and saying, what we do is good enough. We know what we are, but we want to hold ourselves accountable to an even higher standard. So I would argue for those people, particularly within the supply chain, who make the decision that, yes, we want to do this is right for us. We want to have a big vision. Maybe we want to start small, is to really take a look at it and say, please, please, please don't just check a box. Please don't just say I am compliant in the eyes of some agency. Rather, be honest with yourself and say, is what I'm doing any different? If I'm paying, I'll give you a really specific, for instance, if I'm just paying for a carbon neutral offset, how was that carbon offset obtained by the provider? So if I'm a shipper and I'm shipping goods and I'm using a freight broker and they're able to provide me with a carbon offset, that feels good. I feel like I'm doing the right thing. But I would argue you got to ask that question. Well, Mr. or Mrs. Broker, how were you able to obtain that carbon offset? And the answer almost always is, well, we bought it. And then we baked it into the cost that we sold to you, and thank you. You're paying for it as well, but don't we all feel good about this? I'm not suggesting some good wasn't done there. There is some good in that. I think what's better is to partner with providers that their very strategy, their business model, their technology is one in which it produces less carbon, where there's actually less carbon being produced. Electric vehicles in the supply chain are coming online. They're not here yet. It's beginning. I think it's going to take some time until they really make an impact. And in the short term, we have to be honest about it. It's probably going to cost a little more to get our goods shipped on an electric vehicle. And so that's not for everyone. I recognize that, but I think here's an opportunity, particularly for the Fortune 500, to take a leadership role in this and say, we believe in this. We've got the big balance sheets. We can buy these vehicles. We can operate these vehicles. We can deploy them, maybe not in mass, but we can do so in a way where we can create reduce CO2 emissions right away, which effectively subsidizes the R&D of that technology until it gets more mature and it can be rolled out mass market in a way where it's much more cost competitive.
So Oren, we've touched on a lot of really important topics today. Can you, in light of today's conversation, can you explain to us what excites you about the future of the logistics industry?
Yeah, it is exciting. All of this capital started being poured into various form of technology innovations. I know we've discussed a lot of that today. And the pandemic, believe it or not, a lot of life lost, a lot of value destroyed, right? It's been scary. And at the same time, it has been an accelerant. It has been an opportunity to bring technology to bear much more quickly. It has allowed a lot of iterating, a lot of use cases, right, that get pushed through the system in a shorter period of time. I think what I'm really excited about is seeing how it all comes together. That coming into the pandemic, I think there were a lot of us working on various components of the supply chain. Whether it's, iconically, I think people understand the last mile, the sort of Amazon, Alibaba. How do we get goods from that terminal to your home? The first mile, people don't think as much about it, but it's kind of the same phenomena. How do we get out of a manufacturer and get those things on the road? The middle mile, typically, freight, what we work on at Flock Freight. And then how it all comes together now, from visibility to optimization, routing optimization, combining things with things. And we're starting to see a blur of these things coming together. We're also seeing the old and the new coming together, which I think is great. I think people get too hunkered into thinking the new are attempting to replace the old, and the old says the new can't do it, and the new says the old are, we're going to leave you behind. And to be fair, I don't think that's exactly right. I think, to be fair, what we're seeing is these things coming together where the whole is going to be greater than the sum of the parts. I think we're seeing old companies embracing new opportunities, maybe via acquisition or R&D. We're seeing the new that are pretty far along now, like those of us, including Flock Freight, with a lot of capital, able to possibly make acquisitions or bring in from a talent perspective the old. I think what I want the audience to understand is this is not about throwing away the old and simply replacing it with the new. The old was not bad. It was not broken. It was suboptimal. It wasn't as efficient as it needs to be. And the pandemic exposed that. It absolutely exposed a lot of those things. But to be fair to those of us that have been working in supply chain for 2 decades, like myself, a lot of goods have been moved for a long time and have provided a very high quality. And there's clearly some cracks. There's some significant weaknesses, and an opportunity to bring the new and the old together, not just vertically, but also horizontally, to bring in a lot of complementary technologies and bring them together.
I think that's a great way to end. Oren, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today. Thanks so much for joining us at Reuters Next.